She slid a notebook across the table and said, "This is your schedule, Robert. Not welcome home. Not we're so glad you're here. A schedule. Breakfast at 6. Laundry, Monday and Wednesday. Floors mopped Thursday. Kids picked up by 3. I looked at my son across that table. He looked down at his coffee. That was the moment I understood I hadn't been invited into my son's home. I had been hired. I'm 68 years old. I buried my wife. I sold my house. I drove 4 hours because my son called me crying and said, "Dad, I need you." And his wife handed me a job description before I'd even unpacked my bags. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, stay right here, subscribe, because this one is going to hit close to home. I still remember the exact moment my life split in two. Not the day my wife Carol passed away. Not the morning I sat in an empty hospital hallway and signed papers I couldn't read through the blur of my own tears. Those moments broke me, yes, but they didn't trick me. The moment that changed everything was quieter than that. It was a Tuesday night in January. Snow outside. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and reminds you that you're living alone. I had the television on one of those old westerns Carol used to pretend she hated, but always ended up watching with me. I had a cup of coffee going cold on the side table. And then my phone rang. It was Ethan. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to talk to my son, I always wanted to talk to my son. But because Ethan never called on Tuesday nights. Ethan had a schedule. Sunday afternoons, 15 minutes, sometimes 20 if Lauren wasn't in the room. So when I saw his name on that screen at 9:30 on a Tuesday, something in my chest tightened. I picked. "Hey buddy," I said, the old nickname, the one I'd been using since he was 4 years old and decided he was too big for little guy. There was a pause on the other end. Then I heard this sound that I hadn't heard from my son in probably 20 years. A kind of ragged, desperate inhale, like a man trying not to cry. Bo. He used the Vietnamese word. Carol had insisted on it when he was small, even though we were in Colorado, even though the neighbors thought it was strange. He should know where half of him comes from, she always said. Ethan only used that word when he was scared, or when he was small again inside. "Ethan, what's wrong? Talk to me." Nothing's wrong. I mean, something's..." Another pause. I heard him swallow. "Dad, are you sitting down?" "I'm always sitting down. I'm 68. He almost laughed. Almost. "Dad, I need to ask you something. And I need you to really think about it before you say no." I set my coffee cup down. "Okay. Would you consider moving in with us?" The room went quiet. Not the television quiet I was used to. A different kind of quiet. The kind that fills your ears and makes you realize how alone a room can be. For 5 years since Carol passed, I had been living in this house. 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms. A yard that I kept up because Carol loved the yard, even though my knees didn't love the kneeling anymore. Every morning, I woke up in the same bed I'd shared with her for 41 years. Every morning I made 2 cups of coffee before I remembered, and then I drank one and poured the other down the drain. I had a life. It was a quiet life, a lonely life sometimes, but it was mine. "Move in with you," I said. "We have the room, Dad. The guest room is just sitting there. Lauren and I have been talking about it, and we think it would be good. For all of us." "Lauren's idea?" I asked. I didn't mean it as an accusation. It came out before I could stop it. "We both want this," Ethan said a little too quickly. "Dad, you're alone out there. It's been 5 years, and honestly..." Another pause, shorter this time. "We could use the help, with the kids, with things. It would be good." I should have asked more questions. I know that now. I should have said, "What kind of help? And what do you mean by things? And have you and Lauren actually talked about this? Or did you just call me because tonight felt hard?" But here's what happened instead. My son, my boy, the one I taught to ride a bike in this very driveway, The one I held in the emergency room at 2 in the morning when he was 7 and running a fever of 104. The one who cried at Carol's funeral in a way that made me feel less alone in my grief. My son called me on a Tuesday night and said he needed me. And I said yes. I want to stop right here and tell you something, because if you're watching this, you probably know this feeling. You probably know what it's like to say yes before you understand what you're agreeing to. Not because you're foolish, not because you're weak, but because love doesn't always leave room for logic, and when your child asks for you something ancient inside, you just moves. I said yes, and then I spent the next 2 weeks dismantling 68 years of living. My neighbor James Carter came over the afternoon I started packing up the garage. James had been a city police chief for 22 years before he retired. Now he grew tomatoes and read thick biographies and checked on me more than he probably needed to. He was one of those people who looked at you and saw the thing you weren't saying. He stood in the garage doorway watching me sort through boxes of old tools and Christmas decorations and Carol's gardening supplies, and he said, "You're really doing this. Ethan needs me." Ethan's 38 years old. And James crossed his arms. He had this way of going quiet that was more eloquent than most people's speeches. After a moment he said, "Did you ask yourself what you need, Robert?" I didn't answer right away. I was holding a wrench, one I'd used to fix the carburetor on my first car back when I was 19, and had no idea what I was doing, but figured it out anyway. I set it in the keep pile. "I need my son," I said finally. "You already have your son. He's 400 miles away. That's 4 hours. That's not the same as needing to give up your house and move into his spare room." I stopped packing, looked at him. They have the space. And the kids, I barely know my grandchildren. James. Emma's 7. Tyler just turned 5. I've seen them 6 times in 2 years. This is a chance to actually be in their lives. James nodded slowly. And Lauren. There it was. The name that sat in the air between us like smoke. Lauren, my daughter-in-law. 35 years old, sharp as a tack, beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, carefully maintained and slightly intimidating. She had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut, gone to Georgetown, worked in marketing for a company I'd never heard of, that seemed to pay her very well. She and Ethan had met at a work conference 8 years ago, married 2 years after that, and by the time Emma was born, Lauren had taken over the management of their household with the same precision she presumably applied to her job. I liked Lauren. I want to be honest about that. In the beginning, I genuinely liked her. She was smart and funny in sharp-edged ways, and she was good to my son in the early years, or at least she seemed to be. But there had always been something, a slight chill maybe, when I visited. A sense that I was being tolerated rather than welcomed. Carol had felt it too. She used to squeeze my hand on the drive home and say, "She's just Private Bob. Some people need more time." Carol was always more charitable than me. "Lauren's on board," I told James. "Ethan said they talked about it." "Uh-huh." James didn't look convinced. "Well, you know I'm always here if you need to talk." He left without saying anything else, which with James was its own kind of warning. Bad. The drive to Ethan's house in Denver took me 4 hours and 12 minutes. I know the time because I watched it on my dashboard, counting it down, like something I could measure and therefore control. I had a small U-Haul attached to the back of my truck. Not much I'd sold, most of the big furniture donated Carol's clothes to the church. Put the house on the market with a real estate agent named Sandra, who'd been very kind and very professional, and had not once asked me if I was sure. I was not sure. But I kept driving. Ethan and Lauren's house was a newer build in a quiet neighborhood, 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a backyard with a wooden deck that still looked too clean to have children living in it. Emma and Tyler were playing in the front yard when I pulled up, and that right there made everything feel worth it for about 45 seconds. Emma came running. She had Carol's eyes, this kid, this honey brown color that could break your heart. She wrapped her arms around my legs and shouted, "Grandpa Bob is here!" And I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in what felt like weeks. Tyler was more cautious. He stood back near the porch steps and watched me with serious eyes. He had Ethan's face when Ethan was small, round, and careful and thinking everything through. "Hey, buddy," I said. "The old nickname found me again, passed down now." He said, "Are you going to live here forever?" "Not forever, for a while." He seemed to accept that, nodded like a little judge. "Okay, but you can't sleep in my room." "Wouldn't dream of it." Ethan came out of the garage then, and we hugged a real hug, the kind we didn't do enough of anymore, the kind where you can feel the other person exhale. He looked tired, more tired than I'd expected. There were lines around his eyes I didn't remember from Christmas, and his shoulders held a tension that didn't ease even when he smiled. "Dad, you made it." "I made it." "Come on, I'll show you the room." Lauren was inside. She was on a phone call, work I assumed, and she held up one finger when she saw me. The universal gesture for 1 second. I nodded, stood in the entryway with my hat in my hands, and waited. She finished the call, turned to me, smiled. "Robert, good to finally have you here." Finally. An interesting word choice, like my arrival was something that had been long awaited, earned even. "Good to be here," I said. She gestured at the house, the clean, carefully arranged interior, the white walls and chrome fixtures, and absence of anything that looked comfortable. "We've made up the guest room for you. It's small, but it's private. That's all I need." "Great," she smiled again. Then, "Ethan, can you show him I need to get dinner started?" "Robert, do you have dietary restrictions I should know about, salt, gluten?" "No, ma'am. I eat just about anything." "Good. We keep things pretty clean here. Organic where we can. The kids have a nut thing, so nothing with nuts." She was already turning toward the kitchen. "Dinner's at 6:30. We eat together as a family." As a family. I noticed she said it looking at neither me nor Ethan specifically. Just out toward the middle of the room like a policy announcement. Ethan showed me the guest room. It was small. She'd been right about that. A twin bed, a dresser, a window that looked out onto the side of the neighbor's fence. There was nowhere to put my chair, which I'd managed to squeeze into the back of the U-Haul at the last minute. The chair that had been in our living room for 20 years. The chair where Carol sat reading. "I'll figure out where to put a few things," I said. "Of course, yeah." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. He was doing it again, that tension thing with his shoulders. "Dad, I want you to know. This is going to be great. Having you here. I really think it's going to be great." He said it twice. People who say something twice are usually trying to convince themselves. I put my hand on his shoulder. "I'm glad to be here, son." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for a week. We unloaded the truck together. The kids ran around our feet. Lauren made some kind of kale and quinoa dish for dinner that was very healthy and had almost no flavor, and I ate it and said it was delicious and meant it as a kindness. We talked about nothing important, the neighborhood, the kids' school, a project Ethan was working on. Lauren asked me questions about my drive with the same efficient politeness she might use in a job interview. That night, I lay in the twin bed in the small room and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else's house settling into quiet. And I thought, this is going to be fine. People adjust. Families adjust. I was wrong. I know I was wrong because of what happened on the second night, not the second week. The second night, I had been up early. I always wake early habit from 40 years of shift work at the airline. 6 o'clock, my body just gets up, doesn't ask my permission. I'd made coffee, found where Lauren kept it, which was behind a cabinet door with a small label that said "Coffee" in her handwriting. Everything in that kitchen had a label. Everything had a place. I made a mental note to learn the system. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when Lauren came downstairs. She was already dressed full outfit, not pajamas, which surprised me. It was 6:15 in the morning. She stopped when she saw me, and for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something moved across her face that I can only describe as recalibration. Like she'd walked in expecting one thing and found another. Robert, you're up early. Force of habit. She poured herself coffee, stood at the counter looking at something on her phone. Then she went to the kitchen drawer, one of the ones I hadn't looked in yet, and she pulled out a small spiral notebook. Black cover. Looked like the kind of thing you'd find at an office supply store. She set it on the table in front of me. I meant to give you this last night, she said, but it got late. It's a household guide, so you know how things run here. I looked at the notebook. I picked it up, opened it. The first page was titled in Lauren's same precise handwriting, Household Schedule Contributions, and then below it, in neat bullet points, breakfast prepared by 6 a.m. daily. Dishes cleaned and put away by 7 a.m. Laundry Monday and Wednesday. Sheets on Sunday. Please use the machines in the correct order washer first, then transfer promptly to dryer. Do not leave laundry sitting. First floor cleaning daily. Vacuum Tuesday and Friday. Mop Thursday. Dust surfaces as needed. Child supervision available upon request. Mornings 7 to 9. A.M. when both parents need to work. Afternoons 3 to 6 p.m. school days. Grocery runs as needed. See the shared list on the refrigerator. Please do not deviate from the list without checking first. I read the whole page. Then I turned to the second page, which had more. Yard work. Trash schedule. Carpool days. I sat there for a moment. I want to tell you what was happening in my chest in that moment because it matters. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something closer to disorientation. Like the floor had shifted an inch when I wasn't looking. Like I had walked into a room I thought I knew and found all the furniture rearranged. I had worked for Delta Airlines for 37 years. I had maintained aircraft engines. I knew about systems and schedules and checklists. I lived by them. So it wasn't the idea of a schedule that bothered me. It was the fact that this was presented to me not as a conversation, not as, hey, here's how we do things, what do you think, but as a document. Pre-printed, pre-decided, already complete before I had unpacked a single box. I set the notebook down. Lauren, I said carefully, is this what you expect of me? All of this? She looked up from her phone. Her expression was perfectly pleasant. That was the thing. Not hostile, not guilty, just arranged. It's not expectations exactly, she said. It's just how we keep things running. We're a busy household, Robert. Ethan and I both work full-time. The kids have activities. It takes everyone contributing to make it all work. I understand that, I said. But I want to make sure I understand what I'm looking at. Because some of this, I tapped the page, looks like a job description. Lauren put her phone face down on the counter, turned to face me fully. And here is what she said with that same pleasant, unruffled smile. I think of it more as being part of the team. Part of the team. I nodded. I said, I see. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, I did not come here to be managed. I did not say I raised your husband. I put him through college. I held this family together for 40 years before you were part of it. I did not say I am a 68-year-old man who has been asked to report to a 20-page household manual by a woman who was in high school when I was already a grandfather. I said, I see. And that was my first mistake. Not the last, but the first. Damn. Ethan came downstairs at 7:15. The kids were eating breakfast. I had made eggs because I noticed the schedule said breakfast by 6, and it was already past that, and Lauren was on a call in the other room. Ethan looked at the eggs, looked at me, looked at the notebook still sitting on the corner of the table. Something passed over his face. I watched him see it and decide not to see it. Morning, Dad. You didn't have to make breakfast. Seemed like something that needed doing. He poured himself coffee, helped Tyler with something on his plate, did not pick up the notebook, did not acknowledge it. Ethan, I said quietly, just his name. He met my eyes for a moment, and I saw it. I want you to understand that I saw it. The acknowledgement, the guilt, the look of a man who knows something is wrong and has decided for reasons he can't fully explain to proceed as though it isn't. He looked away. We should get you settled today. Is there anything you need for the room? And that was it. That was the second morning. I want to tell you about the chair, Carol's reading chair. An old armchair, brown leather that had cracked and been conditioned back to something like softness over the years. She'd had it since before we were married, bought it at an estate sale in 1977 for $12, and spent 47 years reading in it. Every Sunday morning, every sick day, every night when sleep wouldn't come. After she died, I sat in that chair. Not because I'm sentimental, or maybe I am, maybe that's exactly why. But because when you lose someone, you hold on to the things that still carry the shape of them. I had brought the chair in the U-Haul. When we unloaded it, I put it in the corner of my room, the only place it would fit. It didn't really fit, but I made it work. 3 days after I moved in, I came home from walking Emma to the bus stop to find the chair was gone. Not gone, as in moved to another room. Gone, as in not anywhere I could see it. I found Lauren in the kitchen. Lauren, my armchair, the brown one. Do you know where it is? Oh. She didn't look up from her laptop. I had Ethan move it to the storage unit in the garage. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned it was making the room look a little cluttered, and I had a client coming by yesterday, so I wanted everything to look clean. That chair was in my room. I know, and I'm sorry for not asking first. But Robert, honestly, the room is so small that having that big chair in there was making it feel even smaller. Don't you think you'll be more comfortable without it? I stood there. That chair belonged to my wife, I said. The kitchen was very quiet. I'm sorry, Lauren said again. I'll have Ethan bring it back. She did not sound sorry. She sounded like a woman recalculating the quickest path around an obstacle. Thank you, I said, and I walked back to my room. I sat on the edge of the twin bed because my chair was in a garage, and I looked at my hands. These old hands that had fixed engines, changed diapers, built furniture, held my wife through 37 winters. And I thought James was right. This isn't what I thought it was. The weeks that followed taught me something I don't think I was ready to learn. That being erased doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in accumulations, small ones. Things you could dismiss if you tried hard enough, if you loved your son enough to keep trying. Lauren never once raised her voice at me. I want to be clear about that. She never called me a servant, never said anything directly unkind. She was always on the surface perfectly polite. But the photograph of Carol and me from our anniversary was moved off the living room shelf because it didn't fit the color palette. The family pictures, I'd brought pictures of Ethan as a boy, of me and Carol young, and laughing of 3 generations together, were placed in a drawer for safekeeping after Lauren redid the wall in a more modern look. My coffee mug, a beat-up thing with a Southwest Airlines logo that I'd had for 15 years, was replaced on the cabinet shelf with a matching set of white ceramic mugs. I got you these, Lauren said. Much nicer, don't you think? At dinners, I started to notice that my opinions were heard, and then gently moved past, like furniture arranged to leave the widest walkway. I said something once about how the kids might enjoy a weekend camping trip, something Ethan and I had done together all through his childhood. Lauren said, "That's a sweet idea," and then redirected the conversation to the kids' swimming lessons, and that was the end of it. I started to feel like a clock running in a room where no one could hear it. But the thing that cut deepest, the thing I kept coming back to at night in that small room was Ethan. Not Lauren. Ethan. Because here is what I know about my daughter-in-law. She is who she is. She runs things. She organizes and controls and manages because that is how she moves through the world, and I can respect that even when it costs me something. I am not naive enough to think everyone has to love the way I love. But Ethan knew me. Ethan had sat in the cab of my old Ford truck at 16 years old and told me everything he was afraid of. Ethan had called me from college the night before a big exam just to hear my voice. Ethan had held my hand at his mother's funeral and said, "I don't know how to do this." Dad and I had said, "Neither do I, buddy. We'll figure it out together." And now, Ethan was standing in the kitchen when Lauren handed me that notebook, and he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he turned away. That was the thing that kept me up at night. Not the notebook, not the chair, not the missing photographs. Ethan turning away. About a month in, Lauren had some of her friends over for dinner. I came home from picking up Tyler from school to find the house full of women in their 30s, laughing and drinking white wine, and Lauren moving through them like a conductor. She introduced me. "This is Robert," she said, and then with the lightest, most offhand smile in the world. "He helps us keep the household running. He helps us keep the household running." One of the women, I can't remember her name, something with a K, nodded pleasantly at me and said, "Oh, how long have you been with the family?" I understood immediately what she thought I was, what Lauren had made me appear to be. I looked at Lauren. She was already turning toward someone else. I said very quietly, "I'm Ethan's father." The woman's face changed, confused, then embarrassed, then quickly masked. "Oh, of course, I'm sorry I didn't—" "It's fine," I said. "Happens all the time." It did not happen all the time. It had never happened before in my life. I excused myself, went to my room, sat on the edge of that bed, and I thought about James Carter standing in my garage doorway 2 months ago watching me pack boxes. Robert, the people don't take a man's house in one day. They take it piece by piece, one thing at a time, one silence at a time. I hadn't understood then. I was starting to understand. Margaret Wilson picked up on the third ring, and when I heard her voice, steady, warm, the voice of someone who had sat across a table from me and Carol in the worst year of our lives and never once made us feel small. Something in my chest finally loosened. Not much, just enough to breathe. "Robert Hayes," she said. "It's been too long." "It has," I said. "Margaret, I need your help." "Tell me everything." So I did. I sat in my truck in my son's driveway, the groceries on the seat beside me, the engine off, and I told her everything. The phone call in January, the drive to Denver, the notebook on the second night, the chair in the garage, the photographs in the drawer, the dinner party where Lauren introduced me as the help, the way Ethan looked at the notebook and turned away, and then what I had just heard 20 minutes ago standing in my own hallway with 2 bags of groceries and nowhere to put them. Margaret listened without interrupting. That was something I had always respected about her. She was a listener first and a talker second, which is the opposite of most people and the exact right quality in an attorney. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you safe, Robert?" "Safe. Physically safe. Is anyone threatening you?" "No, nothing like that." "Okay." A pause. "And the property, your house in Colorado Springs. What's the current status?" "I put it on the market. I haven't sold it yet. Sandra, my realtor. She's had a few showings but no offers." "Good." I could hear Margaret writing something. "Robert, I need you to do one thing right now. One thing before you go back inside that house." "What?" "Call Sandra. Tell her to take the house off the market. Today. This afternoon." I sat with that. I think you called me for a reason. And I think whatever that reason is, you don't need to make any irreversible decisions while you're still living under that roof and not thinking clearly. Her voice was not unkind. "The house is your anchor, Robert. Don't cut the rope until you know what water you're swimming in." I called Sandra from the driveway. She answered surprised, asked if everything was okay. I told her to pause the listing. She said she'd take care of it today. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 weeks, like I had done one thing, one single thing, that was entirely mine. I took the groceries inside. Lauren was off the phone. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop, and she looked up when I came in with a normal smile, a perfect Lauren smile, the kind that gave nothing away. "Oh, you're back. Did they have the almond flour?" "They did," I said. "Great." She turned back to her laptop. I put the groceries away. I folded the bags. I did everything I was supposed to do. And the whole time I kept my face arranged into the same expression I'd been wearing for 6 weeks, the expression of a man who is adjusting, adapting, doing his best. But something was different now. Inside, something had gone very still. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I kept waiting for the anger to come crashing in, the way it does in movies, the righteous eruption that clarifies everything. It didn't come. What came instead was something calmer and more dangerous clarity. I saw the situation now without the softening lens of love. I saw it the way Margaret would see it, the way James would see it, the way a stranger would see it if I told them the story from the beginning. An old man moves into his son's house. His daughter-in-law gives him a schedule the second night. His personal belongings are relocated without permission. His identity is systematically erased from the household narrative. And while he's at the grocery store, his daughter-in-law is on the phone discussing how to restructure his property because, and I quote, he doesn't need it anymore. Seen clearly from the outside, it was not complicated. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a matter of different communication styles or adjustment periods, or a daughter-in-law who was simply private and needed more time. It was a plan. And it had been working. That night, after dinner, after the kids were in bed, after Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, watching something on television that he was too tired to actually follow, Lauren came into the kitchen where I was making a cup of tea. She poured herself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and said in a casual voice, too casual, the particular casual of something rehearsed, "Robert, Ethan and I have been thinking about having a conversation with you. About the future. About what makes the most sense long-term." I wrapped both hands around my mug. "What kind of conversation?" "Just practical things. You're settled here now. It doesn't really make sense to have a house sitting empty in Colorado Springs. Financially, practically, there are smarter ways to manage what you have." I looked at her over the rim of my mug. "Are you talking about my house?" "I'm talking about your assets generally." She was very smooth. She was very good at this. "We just want to make sure everything is set up in a way that protects you." Protects me. I let that sit in the air between us. "That's very thoughtful," I said. "We think it would just be cleaner if—" "Lauren." I set my mug down. "I appreciate the concern. I do. Let me think about it." She smiled. "Of course. No rush." There was rush. That was the thing. The entire conversation was rush wrapped in the language of patience. I went to bed. I did not sleep. 3 days later, Margaret called me back with what she'd found. I took the call in my truck again, parked down the street from the house, because I had learned that the house had ears, and I was done letting the house hear things it shouldn't. "Your estate documents are solid, Robert," she said. "Carol and you set everything up properly. The house, your pension, your savings, all of it is under your control alone. No one can touch any of it without your signature." "Good. But here's what I want you to understand." Her voice shifted slightly, not harder but more precise. "The fact that the legal protections are in place doesn't mean someone can't apply pressure to get you to sign something voluntarily. That's how these things typically work. They don't steal from you. They convince you to give." She called it restructuring. "They always call it something like that." A pause. "Robert, what do you want to do?" That was the question. That was always the question, and I hadn't had an answer for it in 6 weeks, because I kept thinking the answer had to involve staying. Staying and fighting and fixing and salvaging, because leaving felt like losing. Leaving felt like admitting that my son had become someone I didn't recognize, and I wasn't ready to admit that. "I don't know yet," I told her, "but I want to be ready." "Then let's get you ready," she said. Margaret and I talked for 40 minutes. She walked me through what I had, what was protected, what my options were. By the time I hung up, I had a clearer picture of my situation than I'd had since January, and that clarity felt like putting on glasses I hadn't known I needed. When I got back to the house, Ethan's car was in the driveway. He was home early, which was unusual. I walked inside and found him and Lauren in the kitchen, standing close together, speaking low. They separated slightly when I came in, not guiltily exactly, but with the particular physical adjustment of people who were just talking about you. "Dad?" Ethan said. "Hey, we were just about to call you." "I was in the truck," I said. We wanted to talk, the three of us. Do you have a minute? I looked at them both. Lauren's expression was composed and pleasant the way it always was when she had prepared for something. Ethan looked tired and a little determined, which meant Lauren had been working on him before I walked in. Sure, I said. I sat down at the kitchen table. Let's talk. Ethan sat across from me. Lauren stayed standing, which was a choice. Standing is a power position, and she understood that instinctively. Dad. Ethan started. We've been thinking about your situation, about how we can make sure you're taken care of long term. And we think Lauren and I both think that it would make a lot of sense to have a more formal arrangement. With the property and… Ethan. I kept my voice even. What specifically are you asking me to do? He glanced at Lauren. She stepped in smoothly. We're thinking about a family trust arrangement. You'd still have security, Robert. You'd still have everything you need. But consolidating assets into a trust that we manage together would mean that you'd have control over my assets. A beat of silence. That's a very negative way to frame it, Lauren said. Is it inaccurate? Another beat. Ethan said, Dad, we're trying to help. Lauren. I looked at her directly. 3 days ago when I was at the grocery store, you were on the phone, in the kitchen. Her expression didn't change, not a flicker. You told someone, David, I think that I don't need the property anymore. That I'm old. That I'm here. That Ethan could talk to me and I'd listen because I always do. The kitchen went completely silent. Lauren looked at me with those controlled eyes, and for the first time I watched the control cost her something. A muscle in her jaw tightened. Robert, I don't know what you think you heard. I heard what I heard, I said, quietly, without heat. Just the simple, unmovable fact of it. I was standing in the hallway. I heard you, all of it. She said nothing. Ethan was looking at his wife. And I watched something happen on his face that I had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure, the particular look of a man seeing something for the first time that was right in front of him the whole time. Lauren, he said. His voice was different, lower. What is he talking about? Ethan. What conversation? It was just… She shifted. For the first time I had ever seen Lauren shifted. A small adjustment of posture, a fraction of a second where the composure slipped, and I saw underneath it something that looked almost like uncertainty. I was talking to David about financial planning options. It wasn't… You talked to David Reese about my father's property. David Reese, I noted. A name with a last name. Not just a financial advisor, someone they had already been consulting. It was a preliminary conversation, Lauren said. I was exploring options. Without asking me. Ethan, I was trying to help. Lauren. Ethan's voice had gone flat in a way I hadn't heard before. Something hard underneath it. Stop. She stopped. And then my son turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in 6 weeks. Not managed guilt, not convenient apology, real recognition. The face of a man who was putting together a picture he had been refusing to look at. Dad, he said. I didn't know about the call. I know, I said. I believe you. He stopped. His jaw worked. I need to… He pushed back from the table and stood up and walked out of the kitchen. Lauren and I sat in the silence he left behind. She looked at the table. I looked at her. I want you to understand something, I said. My voice was calm. I was not interested in cruelty. I was not interested in winning. I came here for my son. I came here for those 2 children asleep upstairs. I came here because I thought this was a family that wanted me. And I was willing to make coffee at 6 in the morning and mop floors and drive carpool and put my wife's chair in a garage because I thought that's what it cost to be here, to be part of something. Lauren's jaw was tight. But there is a difference, I said, between being part of a family and being useful to one. And I think somewhere along the way, you forgot that I know the difference. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, I never meant for it to get this far. Which part? She didn't answer. Lauren? I kept my voice the same. Level. I'm not your enemy. I never was. But I am not a resource. I'm a person. And I'm that man's father. And if you want this family to be something real, that has to mean something. She nodded. Once. Small. And I saw in that small nod something I hadn't expected to see from Lauren. The look of someone who has just been told a truth they already knew and have been working very hard not to know. I got up, left the kitchen. Ethan was in the garage, standing next to the storage unit where my chair was. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there looking at it. "Hey," I said. He turned around. His eyes were red. "Hey." I walked over, stood beside him. We looked at the chair together for a moment, this old cracked leather thing that had no business being in anyone's garage. "That's your mother's chair," I said. "I know." He swallowed hard. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "I know you are. I should have—" He stopped. "When she gave you that notebook, I saw it and I—" His voice broke slightly. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was fine. I told myself you were adjusting and she was stressed and it would smooth out. But I knew. I knew it wasn't right, and "You were afraid," I said. He looked at me. "You were afraid of what it would cost to say something, to her, about me." I looked at my son, my boy, my blood. The best thing Carol and I ever made, and I felt a grief so wide and so quiet that it didn't even feel like grief anymore. It felt like weather. "Ethan, I understand that. I do. But I need you to understand something too." "What?" "Every time you chose to say nothing, you were choosing. You told yourself you weren't making a decision by staying silent. But silence is always a decision. And every time you made that decision, I lost a little more of this." He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. Didn't speak. "I don't say that to punish you," I said. "I say it because I need you to know that your silence had a cost. It had a cost to me. And it had a cost to you, I think. Look at you." He looked terrible. He looked like a man who had been paying a debt in installments for so long he'd forgotten what the original purchase was. "She called David Reese about my house," I said. "Did you know she was going to do that?" He shook his head. "No, I swear, Dad. I knew she wanted to talk to you about the property, but I didn't know I didn't know about that call." "I believe you," I said. "But Ethan, that call happened in your kitchen, about your father's assets. And your wife has been managing your household and your children, and apparently your finances in ways that you're the last to know about. That's a problem. And that problem isn't about me." He was quiet for a long time. "She's scared," he said finally. "We have more debt than I've told anyone. A lot more. The house, the second car, her parents lent us money 2 years ago, and we haven't paid it back. She's terrified. And when she's terrified, He paused. "She manages things. She controls what she can control. I understand that," I said. "I do. But Ethan, you can't manage people. Not the people who love you. You can't schedule their dignity and organize their grief and put their memories in a drawer for safekeeping. You can't do that and call it family." He bent his head. I watched his shoulders shake once briefly, and then hold still. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I had when he was small and sick and frightened. Just my hand. My old rough hand. We stood there in that garage for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan lifted his head and looked at Carol's chair. "Can we bring it back inside?" "Yes," I said. "We can." We carried it in together. We put it in the living room by the window where it didn't fit the color palette and didn't match anything Lauren had chosen, and looked exactly like what it was, 47 years of a woman's life worn into leather brought home. Lauren was standing in the doorway when we set it down. She looked at the chair. She looked at me. She looked at her husband. She didn't say a word, but she didn't ask us to move it either. That night was the quietest the house had ever been. The kids went to bed without the usual arguments. Ethan and Lauren spoke in low voices in their room for what sounded like hours. I lay in my room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of a marriage having a reckoning, and I felt no satisfaction in it, only a tired, aching sadness that this was where we had all ended up. I had come here to be close to my son, and I was about to have to leave him to get there. That understanding settled into me slowly, the way cold does not, all at once, not dramatically, just a gradual drop in temperature until you realize you've been shivering for a while. I could stay. I could accept Lauren's eventual apology if one came. I could accept Ethan's guilt and his promises and his good intentions. I could keep making breakfast at 6 and folding dish towels in thirds and making myself small enough to fit in the spaces they assigned me. Or I could do the thing that James had been trying to tell me for months. I could choose myself, not in anger, not in revenge, but in the simple radical act of deciding that at 68 years old, after everything I had built and lost and carried, I was still worth choosing. I picked up my phone. I sent Margaret a message. I'm ready to talk about next steps. She replied within minutes. I'll call you tomorrow morning. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Carol's chair was back in the living room. My son was down the hall having the hardest conversation of his marriage, maybe because of me, and maybe in spite of me. My grandchildren were asleep. The house was quiet. And I knew with the quiet certainty of a man who has finally stopped arguing with himself that I was not going to be here much longer. Not because I was beaten, not because I was giving up, but because staying at this point would mean disappearing. And I had already disappeared enough for one lifetime. I was 68 years old. I had fixed aircraft engines. I had held my wife through 41 winters. I had raised a son with my bare hands and an open heart. I had survived the worst kind of quiet, the quiet of a house where the person you love most is simply gone. I was not going to be managed. I was not going to be scheduled. I was not going to sit in someone else's armchair in someone else's house and wait for permission to matter. But first, there was something I had to do. There was a birthday party coming. Ethan's 39th. Lauren had been planning it for weeks, I knew, because the guest list was on the refrigerator and the grocery order was on the shared list. 30 people, catered appetizers, a cake from the bakery downtown, and Lauren, I had no doubt, was planning to use the occasion to finalize things, to make the family trust conversation happen in front of people in a context where saying no would feel like a scene like ingratitude, like an old man making trouble at his own son's party. I had been in this situation before in a different form. 37 years of working with complicated machinery had taught me one thing above all: the best way to deal with a system that isn't working isn't to fight it while it's running. You wait. You prepare. You choose the right moment. The party was in 11 days. I had 11 days. And Margaret Wilson had 32 years of family law experience, a very good memory, and a particular professional distaste for people who tried to separate elderly parents from their assets while calling it love. I made one more call that night. James. He picked up on the second ring. I told him the date. I told him to come. You're going to need a witness, I said. I'll be there, James said immediately. No questions, no hesitation. That was the thing about people who were actually in your corner. You didn't have to explain. James, I said, bring your suit. A pause. Then, with the particular understated satisfaction of a man who had spent 22 years waiting for the right moment to say the right thing, James Carter said, already planned on it. The 11 days between that night in the garage and Ethan's birthday party were the strangest days I have ever lived through. Not the hardest I had. Harder ones the week Carol died, the morning I signed the papers the first Christmas alone. But the strangest. Because I was living in two realities at once. On the surface, I was still Robert Hayes, the man who made breakfast at 6 and folded dish towels in thirds and picked Tyler up from school on Tuesdays. Underneath, I was a man preparing to dismantle the situation he was living in, piece by careful piece. Margaret and I talked every other day. She had pulled the estate documents, reviewed everything, and confirmed what she'd told me the first night: my assets were mine. My property was mine. Not a single piece of it could be touched without my signature. But she also said something that stayed with me. Robert, the legal protection is the floor, she said. It keeps you from being robbed. It doesn't keep you from being pressured, and pressure is what they've been applying for 2 months. I know, I said. So here's what I want to do. I want to come to the party. I hadn't expected that. Margaret. Not to make a scene, not to threaten anyone, just to be present, because people behave differently when an attorney is in the room. A pause. And because you deserve to have someone in your corner who isn't also trying to protect a marriage or manage a situation. I thought about James, who had said the same thing in different words. All right, I said. Good. And Robert, don't change anything before the party. Keep doing what you're doing. Let them think the conversation is still on track. That was the hardest part. Not the planning, not the waiting, the pretending. Going through the motions of a life that I had already decided to leave with a face arranged into something that looked like normal. Lauren, for her part, had been different since the night in the kitchen. Quieter. More careful. She hadn't apologized, not directly, not in words, but she had stopped adding items to the schedule, and she had started saying please and thank you in the particular way of someone who knows they overplayed a hand and is waiting to see what it costs them. She was recalibrating. I could see her doing it, the small adjustments, the slightly warmer tone, the way she asked my opinion about something at dinner one night, and actually waited for the answer. It almost worked. That's the honest truth. There were moments in those 11 days where I looked at Lauren across the dinner table and thought, maybe this is a person who can learn. Maybe there is still something here worth building. And then I would remember the phone call. He doesn't need that property anymore. He's old. He's here. What's he going to do with a house he's not even living in? And the maybe dissolved. Ethan was different too. He was paying attention in a way he hadn't since I arrived, coming home earlier, sitting with the kids at dinner, instead of half watching his phone, asking me questions about things he used to know and had forgotten to remember. One afternoon he came out to the driveway where I was doing a routine check on my truck and just stood there handing me things when I needed them, the way he used to when he was 12, and thought being in the garage with me was the best possible use of a Saturday. We didn't talk about Lauren. We didn't talk about the party, or the property, or Margaret, or any of it. We talked about the truck. We talked about a camping trip we took when he was 9. He told me about a project at work that was giving him trouble, and I listened and asked questions, and felt for a little while like his father again, instead of a fixture in his household. On the drive home from Tyler's soccer practice the Thursday before the party, Tyler said to me from the back seat, "Grandpa Bob, are you gonna leave?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "What makes you ask that?" "Emma said you might leave." "Emma's very smart." "Are you?" I kept my eyes on the road. "I don't know yet, buddy." He thought about this for a moment. "If you leave, can we still see you?" "Yes," I said immediately, because that was the one thing I was absolutely certain of. That will never change. You understand me, that never changes. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to looking out the window. And I drove with both hands on the wheel and my jaw set, and the particular ache of a man who loves some people in a situation more than the situation deserves. The party was on a Saturday. Lauren had arranged everything with the precision she applied to all things she cared about: catered food, borrowed folding tables, a playlist that started sophisticated and was designed to get warmer as the evening went on. 30 people. Colleagues of Ethan's, friends of Lauren's, a few people I'd met at Christmas, and a few I'd never seen before. The house smelled like good food and effort. James arrived at 4 o'clock, an hour before guests, in the dark suit I'd asked him to wear. He looked exactly like what he was, a man of authority who didn't need to announce it. Lauren met him at the door, and her smile was perfectly gracious, but I saw her take him in. Register. The suit register, the posture register, the way he looked at the house, the way he'd looked at it the first time he visited. She filed the information away. That was Lauren. She was always filing. Margaret arrived at 4:30. She was 61, silver-haired, the kind of woman who could make a business suit look like armor without trying. She brought wine because she was also a person, and people bring wine to parties, and she hugged me at the door and said quietly, "How are you doing?" Ready, I said. Good. She squeezed my arm once and went to introduce herself to James, and I watched the two of them shake hands and immediately begin speaking in the low, efficient way of people who recognize each other as competent. Ethan saw Margaret and I watched his face process her. He knew who she was. She had been at Carol's funeral. She had handled the estate. He came over and shook her hand and said it was good to see her, and then he said to me quietly, "Dad, why is Margaret here?" "She's a friend," I said. "She wanted to come." He held my gaze for a moment. I could see him deciding how much he understood. Then he nodded slowly and went back to his guests. By 6 o'clock, the house was full and loud and warm, and Ethan was moving through it with a birthday drink in his hand, laughing more than I'd seen him laugh in months, and I stood near the kitchen and watched and felt the specific bittersweet quality of a good moment inside a bad situation. Lauren found me at 6:15. She came to stand beside me with a glass of wine and looked out at the party and said in a tone that was almost intimate, almost conspiratorial, like we were two people on the same side of something. "I think this is a good night to have that conversation, Robert. Everyone's in a good mood. Ethan's relaxed. It would just be a quick thing. I have the papers ready. It won't take 10 minutes, and then it's done, and we can all just enjoy the evening." I looked at her. I kept my voice entirely neutral. "Papers. The trust documents. David drafted them. It's straightforward." She met my eyes steadily. "I know things have been rocky, but this is just about making sure everyone's protected. You, us, the kids. 10 minutes. She thought it would take 10 minutes. She had been planning this for months, and she thought in 10 minutes at her husband's birthday party, surrounded by 30 people who would witness an old man making trouble if he said no, she would finalize it. And 2 months ago, maybe even 2 weeks ago, she might have been right. "All right," I said. "Let's have the conversation." Something moved briefly across her face. Surprise quickly managed. She had expected more resistance. "Now, you said everyone's in a good mood." I looked at her steadily. "Let's do it now." She collected herself. "Okay, I'll get Ethan." She moved through the party to find her husband. I turned and found James and Margaret with my eyes across the room. James gave me a small nod. Margaret was already moving toward the dining room. "This is the part of the story where I need you to understand something. I am not a dramatic man. I did not want a scene. I did not want witnesses and confrontation and the kind of moment that people replay at family dinners for decades. That is not who I am, and it was not what I had planned. What I had planned was simpler and harder, and in the end more true." Ethan came to the dining room looking mildly puzzled. Birthday drink still in hand. He saw Margaret setting a folder on the table, and he stopped walking. I watched his face do the math. He looked at me. "Dad, what's happening?" "Lauren wanted to have a conversation," I said. "About the trust documents." His eyes went to Lauren. "Tonight, it'll be quick," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. She hadn't expected Margaret to be sitting at the table. She hadn't expected the folder. She had expected to pull out her documents, and I would be looking at papers I hadn't seen before alone, without counsel, inside a house full of social pressure. Instead, she was looking at a 61-year-old attorney who had been doing family law for 32 years and had the particular stillness of someone who has been in this room before. "Lauren," Margaret said pleasantly, "I understand you have some documents regarding Robert's assets." Lauren looked at me. For the first time, there was something raw in her expression. Not anger, not composure. Something that looked almost like the moment before you understand you've miscalculated something significant. "I'm Robert's attorney," Margaret continued. "I've been his attorney for 15 years. Any documents regarding his estate will need to come through me." She folded her hands on the table. "But I'd love to see what you've prepared." Lauren did not move. Ethan said, "Lauren, what documents?" "It was just the trust." "What trust? I thought we were going to talk to my dad about options. I didn't know there were already documents." "David drafted them as a starting point. It wasn't, 'You had David Reese draft legal documents about my father's property without telling me.'" The party was still going on in the next room. Music, voices, laughter. And in the dining room, the Hayes family was very, very quiet. Lauren said carefully, "Ethan, this isn't the place. When were you going to tell me Lauren before or after he signed?" Margaret reached into her own folder and placed 3 pages on the table. I recognized what they were. I had reviewed them with her on Wednesday. She laid them out quietly without preamble. The first was a photocopy of the household schedule Lauren had given me on my second night. The second was a printed transcript of the phone call. Not the whole call, just the relevant section. James had recorded it on his phone when I told him about it. I had not asked him to. He had simply done it because 22 years of law enforcement had given him instincts I didn't have, and he had driven down that Saturday and asked me to tell him exactly where I had been standing, and then walked through the house and stood in the hallway himself. Lauren saw the transcript. She went very still. The third was a letter Margaret had written addressed to David Reese, informing him that Robert Hayes was represented by counsel, and that any further discussions regarding his assets were to go through her office. Ethan picked up the transcript. He read it. I watched his face while he read it. I watched him find the line. He doesn't need that property anymore. He's old. He's here. And I watched what happened to him when he read those words in his own dining room, with a birthday drink in his hand, and 30 people in the next room, and his wife standing across the table. He set the paper down. He didn't look at Lauren. He looked at me. "Dad," he said. "I'm sorry. Not to Lauren. Not to the room. To me. Just to me." "I know," I said. "I didn't know about the documents." "I believe you. But I knew something was wrong, and His jaw worked. I kept telling myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. "It was," I said. Simply. Kindly. Just the truth. Lauren said, "Ethan, I was trying to protect us." "Don't." He said it quietly. No yelling, no drama. Just a man who had reached the place where the word was enough. Just don't. She stopped. Margaret gathered her papers and said in the tone of someone wrapping up a meeting, "I think that's probably enough for tonight. Robert, whenever you're ready, we can discuss next steps." She stood, excused herself, went back to the party as though she had simply stepped away to take a call. James followed her a moment later after placing one hand briefly on my shoulder as he passed. Ethan and Lauren and I sat in the dining room while 30 people laughed and ate catered appetizers in the next room. The music was warmer now, the way Lauren had planned it, the playlist moving into something more comfortable as the evening progressed. None of us spoke for a long moment. Then Ethan said, "What are you going to do, Dad?" "I'm going to leave," I said. "Not tonight, not to make a point, but soon. I'm going to find a place of my own." "Dad." "Ethan." I looked at him carefully. "This isn't a punishment. I need you to hear that. I'm not leaving because I'm angry. I'm leaving because staying here has been costing me something I can't get back, and I am not willing to spend the rest of my life paying that cost. Do you understand the difference?" He was quiet for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I do. You are my son. That does not change. It cannot change. But I cannot live in a house where I have to earn my own dignity every morning." Lauren made a sound. Small. Almost involuntary. I looked at her. Her composure was gone. Not in pieces, not dramatic, just absent. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just been told it was all right to set it down. "I didn't mean to make you feel like that," she said. "I know you didn't mean it the way it happened." That was honest. I believed it. But Lauren, impact is not the same as intention. You intended to protect your family. The impact was that I spent 8 weeks feeling like a stranger in my son's home. She nodded, looked at the table. "The phone call," she said. "To David. I was scared. We're in more trouble than Ethan knows than I let him know. I was trying to solve it without scaring him, and She stopped. "I stopped seeing you as a person. I started seeing you as a solution." That was the most honest thing she had said to me in 8 weeks. Maybe the most honest thing she had said in this house in longer than that. "Thank you," I said for saying that. Ethan reached across the table and took Lauren's hand. Not to comfort her, not as a gesture of forgiveness, more like a man making sure the person next to him is still there. She turned her hand and held his. They needed to have a conversation that I could not be part of and was not meant to witness. That was clear. I stood up. "Go be with your guests," I said. "It's your birthday." Ethan looked up at me. "Dad, go." I put my hand on his shoulder for a moment, just briefly. "We'll talk. I'm not going anywhere tonight." He nodded. He and Lauren went back to the party hand in hand, carrying whatever they were carrying. I stood in the dining room alone for a moment. Then I went and found Emma. She was in the corner of the living room with a plate of dessert, watching the adults with those honey-brown eyes taking everything in. She looked up when she saw me. "Hey," I said. "Hey." She scooted over on the bench without being asked, making room. I sat next to her. She offered me a piece of her chocolate cake. I took it. We sat there together in the noise of the party and ate chocolate cake and said nothing. And I thought about Carol, who had Carol's eyes, who had asked me 7 weeks ago if I liked living here, and accepted my honest answer with the equanimity of a 7-year-old who understood more than she was supposed to. After a while, Emma said without looking at me, "Are you okay, Grandpa Bob?" I thought about it, really thought. "I'm going to be," I said. She leaned against my arm. "Okay." We stayed like that until the party began to wind down. Guests collecting coats and saying their goodbyes, the catered trays going mostly empty, the playlist cycling into something quieter. I helped clean up, because that's who I am. I was not going to stop being who I am because the situation had turned. I stacked plates and folded napkins and carried things to the kitchen while Ethan said goodbye to the last of his guests. At 10 o'clock, the house was quiet. Tyler was asleep on the couch. Emma was almost there, fighting it the way she always did. Lauren was in the kitchen running water. Ethan sat in the chair across from Carol's chair, which was still in the living room, still exactly where we had put it. "That chair looks right in here," he said. "Yes," I said. "It does." He looked at it for a long time. Mom would have hated this house. I almost laughed. She would have lasted about 2 weeks before she started rearranging things, and she wouldn't have apologized for it either. Not even slightly. We sat with Carol between us the way we always did when we talked about her present and absent and more vivid than the room. Then Ethan said, "When are you thinking of leaving?" 2 weeks, I said. "Margaret's helping me find a place, something small near the mountains, close enough to drive to. Close enough so we can still see you." "That's the idea," he nodded. "I'm going to do better, Dad. With Lauren, we're going to get into counseling. I've been avoiding it because I thought we could manage things ourselves, and He stopped. "I've been managing everything except what actually mattered." "I know. I should have said something to her, the night she gave you the notebook. I should have walked in there and said, 'That's my father, not an employee, and if you can't see the difference, then we have a problem.'" "Yes," I said. "You should have." He flinched. I hadn't softened it. I had decided sometime in the last 8 weeks that my son had enough people in his life managing information to protect him. What he needed was someone who would tell him the truth. "But you're going to now," I said. "That's what matters. Is it enough? After everything." "It's a start," I said. "And starts are what we have. None of us get to go back." Lauren appeared in the doorway. She had her arms crossed, not defensively, but like she was holding herself together. She looked at me, and then at the floor, and then back at me. "Robert," she said, "I'd like to say something, if you'll let me." "Go ahead." She took a breath. "I was wrong. Not just strategically wrong or legally wrong. Actually wrong. I brought you into this house and I assigned you a function, and I convinced myself that was family because it was useful because it solved things. And She stopped, pressed her lips together. I told myself you were adjusting. I told myself it was fair because everyone was contributing. But I knew. I knew the notebook was too much on the second night. And I did it anyway because I thought I could manage it. Manage you. The room was quiet. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight, she said. I don't think tonight is the right time for that. But I wanted you to hear me say without excuses, without explaining it as pressure or fear or stress, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter-in-law for a long moment. She was 35 years old. She was smart and scared, and she had been running so fast for so long that she had stopped being able to tell the difference between solving a problem and using a person. That wasn't an excuse, but it was a truth. And I had lived 68 years, and I knew that most people who hurt others aren't doing it from cruelty. They're doing it from fear and exhaustion and the terrible shortcuts that intelligent people take when they're desperate. I hear you, Lauren, I said. Thank you. She nodded, uncrossed her arms. Something in her face settled into something softer. Good night, Robert, she said. Good night. She went upstairs. Ethan helped me carry Tyler to bed. Emma walked herself barely awake, pressing her face briefly against my arm in the hallway before she went into her room. I stood in the quiet house. Carol's chair was in the living room. My coffee mug was on the shelf. 2 months of work and silence and careful observation, and one birthday party had brought us here to this particular quiet, which was a different quality of quiet than before. Not the quiet of things being suppressed, the quiet of things being said. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about what it would feel like to have my own space again. A window that looked at something I had chosen. A coffee mug I had not been replaced. A morning without a schedule. And I thought about Emma's shoulder against my arm, and Tyler asking if we'd still see each other, and Ethan in the garage looking at his mother's chair. I was not leaving these people. I was leaving this arrangement. And tomorrow I would start making that clear, one honest conversation at a time. The morning after the birthday party, I woke up at 5:45, and for the first time in 8 weeks, I did not make breakfast at 6 o'clock. I made my coffee. I sat in Carol's chair, which was still in the living room, still exactly where Ethan and I had placed it 2 nights before. I watched the light change through the window, and I drank my coffee, and I did not fold a single dish towel, and I did not check the schedule on the refrigerator, and I did not perform any of the functions I had been assigned. I just sat. It was the most radical thing I had done in 2 months. Lauren came downstairs at 6:20 and stopped when she saw me sitting there instead of standing at the stove. She looked at the empty kitchen, looked at me. I looked back at her, pleasant calm, a man drinking his coffee in a chair. She made her own breakfast. She did not say a word about it. Ethan came down at 7. He saw the same thing Lauren saw, and he also said nothing, but his expression was different. Something in it that looked almost like relief. The way a person looks when a thing they were afraid to hope for quietly comes true. I drank my coffee and watched the morning arrive. That afternoon I called Margaret. She had already spoken to a property management contact she knew in Evergreen, a small mountain town about 40 minutes west of Denver. Close enough to drive, far enough to breathe. She told me there was a rental available, a small house, 1 bedroom, a yard, a view of the ridge. It would be available in 3 weeks. Do you want to see it? She asked. I trust you, I said. Robert, I want it. Whatever it is, I want it. A pause, warm and knowing. I'll handle the paperwork. I went to find Ethan that evening. He was in the backyard, alone, sitting on the clean deck with a beer he hadn't opened, looking at nothing in particular. I sat down next to him, and we were quiet for a moment, the way we had learned over these past 2 weeks to be quiet together, without it feeling like absence. I found a place, I said. Evergreen. Margaret helped. He turned to look at me. Evergreen. That's 40 minutes. Yes, that's close. That's the idea. He looked back at the yard. When? 3 weeks. He nodded slowly, turned the unopened beer in his hands. I don't want you to go, he said. I know, but I understand why you have to. Ethan. I waited until he looked at me. I am not leaving you. I am leaving this arrangement. There is a difference, and I need you to hold on to that difference." He nodded. His jaw was set the way it got when he was trying not to show that something was costing him. He had his mother's jaw. I had forgotten that until just now. Carol's jaw. Carol's stubbornness. Carol's particular way of being moved by something and not wanting to show it. "I love you, son," I said. I didn't say it often enough. We were not that kind of family growing up, not unloving, just not vocal about it, the way men of my generation often weren't. Carol was the one who said it freely, easily, the way breathing. After she was gone, I tried to say it more. I was still learning. Ethan's throat worked. "I love you too, Dad." We sat out there until it got dark. At some point he opened the beer, and I went inside and got myself a glass of water, and we talked about small things. The truck Tyler's soccer, whether Evergreen got more snow than Denver in the winter. Small things that were really large things, wearing small clothes. The 3 weeks moved differently than the previous 8. The weight had shifted, not gone. Things were still complicated, still fragile, still in the early stages of being rebuilt, but the specific oppressive weight of pretending everything was fine had lifted, and what replaced it was something more honest and therefore more bearable. Lauren and I had a conversation, just the two of us, on the second Wednesday. She came and found me in the kitchen in the mid-morning when the kids were at school and Ethan was at work, and she sat down at the table and put her hands flat on it like she was steadying herself and said, "Can we talk?" "Yes," I said. I mean really talk, not managed, not planned. I sat down across from her. "All right." She was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. Then she said, "I need to tell you something that I haven't told Ethan yet. Something I should have told him a long time ago." I waited. "We're not just in debt," she said. "We're in significant debt. The house is mortgaged above its value. The second car was a mistake I made 18 months ago without telling Ethan the full terms. My parents, we owe them $60,000. Ethan thinks it's 40. She pressed her lips together. "I have been managing the numbers in my head for 2 years and telling him everything was almost fine. And it wasn't almost fine. It was not fine." I looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," she exhaled, "because you were in that hallway and you heard me tell David you didn't need your property anymore, and you had every right to walk out of this house that night and call a lawyer and shut us down completely. And instead you waited. You gave Ethan a chance to see it for himself." She met my eyes. "And I want you to know that I understand what that cost you. And I want you to know that I'm going to tell Ethan the truth. All of it. This week." I sat with that. "Lauren, why did you think getting control of my assets would solve your debt problem?" She almost smiled, but it was the sad kind. "It wouldn't have solved it. It would have bought time. That's all I was thinking about, buying time. Enough time to maybe turn things around before Ethan found out how bad it really was." She shook her head. "I convinced myself that you didn't really need the property because you were here and you were settled, and what did one more house matter? I made you into a number on a spreadsheet and I—" Her voice caught once briefly. "You're not a number. You're his father. You're their grandfather. You're a person." "Yes," I said quietly. "I am." "I'm sorry, Robert." And this time it was different from the night of the party. That apology had been composed, prepared, delivered. This one came from somewhere else. This one cost her something. "I'm genuinely sorry." I looked at my daughter-in-law for a long moment. This woman who was sharp and scared, and had been running from a truth for 2 years, and had run straight through me on her way. This woman who loved my grandchildren with something fierce and real. This woman who had made my son's life smaller in some ways, and larger in others, which is what most people do to the people they love when they don't know how to ask for help. "I accept your apology," I said. "And Lauren, I want to say something to you." She looked up. "Tell Ethan, all of it. Today, not this week today. Because there is nothing in that conversation that is worse than what carrying it alone has already done to you." Her eyes filled. She blinked it back hard the way she always controlled herself. "Okay," she said. "You cannot build a real family on managed information. I know you know that." "I know," she said. "I know." She told him that night. "I know because I was in my room and I could hear the conversation, and it was long and it was hard, and there were moments of silence that were harder than the words. But it was real. It was the sound of a marriage having an honest conversation for the first time in longer than either of them wanted to admit." The next morning, Ethan knocked on my door at 6:30. He looked like he hadn't slept. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his hands. "You knew," he said, "about how bad it was." "I suspected. She told me everything." "Good." "It's bad, Dad. It's really bad." "I know," I said. "But it's knowable now. You can't fix what you can't see." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to need to make some decisions about the house, about the cars, about a lot of things." "Yes." "I don't know if we can keep this house." "Maybe you can't," I said. "That's okay." He looked at me. "How is that okay?" "Because a house is a structure. A family is people. You can lose the house and keep the family. You cannot lose the family and keep the house." I looked at my son steadily. "Which one matters?" He knew the answer. He had always known the answer. He just needed to hear someone say it out loud. "Margaret knows some financial counselors," I said. "Good ones. I can ask her to send you a name." He nodded. Then he said very quietly, "Dad, did you ever think about just not telling me any of it? Just leaving and not saying anything?" I thought about that honestly. "For about a week," I said, "after I heard Lauren on the phone. I thought about just calling Margaret and locking everything down and walking out without a word." "Why didn't you?" I looked at him. "Because you're my son, and walking out without giving you the chance to see it would have meant I thought you couldn't. And I have never in 38 years believed that you couldn't do the right thing. I just had to wait for you to believe it yourself." He put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he steadied. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set, and he looked for the first time in months like the person I raised. "I'm going to be better," he said. "I know you've heard that." "I'm not keeping score," I said. "I'm watching what you do, that's all." That was the last real conversation we had before I left. My moving day was a Thursday. Margaret had arranged everything: the rental truck, the paperwork, the keys to the place in Evergreen. James drove down the night before and stayed, which meant I had someone to eat dinner with who wasn't performing. Anything, wasn't managing anything, was just James. We ordered pizza. We ate it at the kitchen table, and he told me about his tomatoes, and I told him about the view from the rental property that Margaret had described to me, and it was the most normal evening I had spent in that house in 8 weeks. The morning I packed. Emma got up before school and sat on the floor of my room and watched me fold things into boxes with the same unguarded attention she gave to everything. Tyler stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, which was his version of being upset without admitting it. "You're really going," Tyler said. "I'm really going." "To Evergreen." "To Evergreen. Is that far?" 40 minutes. He uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. "Can we come see you? I'm counting on it. I'm going to need someone to help me figure out the yard." His arms dropped. "I'm good at yards." "I know you are. That's why I'm asking." He came into the room then and started helping me pack with the particular focused seriousness of a 5-year-old who has decided that something matters. Emma watched us for a while and then started helping too, wrapping things in newspaper the way I showed her, slow and careful, treating every object like it might be important. Lauren came to the doorway at one point and watched the 3 of us packing in silence. I looked up and met her eyes, and she gave me a small nod, and I gave her one back, and that was enough. We had said what needed to be said. The rest would be built over time, or it wouldn't, and either way, it would be real. Ethan loaded boxes with James and me all morning. He didn't talk much. When the truck was full, he stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets and looked at the boxes and looked at me and looked at the truck and looked like a man trying to memorize the moment from the inside of it. 40 minutes, I said. 40 minutes, he agreed. I want you and Lauren in counseling by the time I come visit. Both of you, not just her. He almost smiled. Yes, sir. And call the financial advisor Margaret recommends. This week. I will. And Ethan. He looked at me. Don't ever let someone hand your father a job description again. I held his gaze. Whether that's me, or someday your own kids, or anyone who comes into your home needing to belong somewhere, don't let that happen again. He held my gaze. I won't, he said. And I believed him. I hugged my son in his driveway. A real hug, both arms, the kind that acknowledges the weight of things without needing to name them all. He held on for a moment longer than I expected. I let him. I hugged Emma and Tyler, who had come outside to see me off. Emma said, "Grandpa Bob, will you call me when you get there?" And I said, "First thing." Tyler handed me a drawing he had apparently made at some point this morning, without any of us noticing, two figures in a yard, one tall and one small, with the word yard written at the top in his careful kindergarten letters. I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket. James drove the truck. I followed in my own truck. We pulled out of that driveway on a Thursday morning with the sun just getting warm, and I did not look back. Not because I was angry, not because I was done with those people, but because I had learned over 68 years that the way to honor a thing is not to cling to it. It's to carry it with you and keep moving. The drive to Evergreen took 43 minutes. We came around a bend and the mountains were suddenly there, close and enormous and real, in the way that mountains are real when you haven't been near them for a while and you've almost forgotten what real feels like. Margaret was already there when we arrived. She had brought keys and a small plant for the windowsill and a thermos of coffee, and she handed me the coffee first, and didn't say anything dramatic about the moment, which I appreciated more than I can say. The house was small. One bedroom, a living room, a kitchen with a window that looked at the ridge, a yard that needed some work, a porch with 2 steps and a railing I was already mentally calculating how to reinforce. I stood in the middle of the living room with a coffee in my hand and looked at the empty space and thought about what would go where. My chair first. Carol's chair by the window where the light came in. The photographs not in a drawer, not in storage, but on the wall where I could see them. The beat-up coffee mug with the Southwest Airlines logo, the one that had been replaced with white ceramic, the one I had kept in the back of the U-Haul all along because I was not willing to leave it behind. There was a small table against the wall. I set the mug on it, looked at it. It looked exactly right. James and I spent the afternoon unloading, and then he drove back to Colorado Springs, and I sat on the porch alone in the early evening, with another cup of coffee, and listened to the sound of the ridge, which was wind and birds, and the occasional creak of a tree, and nothing else. My phone rang at 5:45. Emma. Grandpa Bob, did you get there? I got there. Is it nice? It's very nice. You can see the mountains from the porch. Can we come see? Whenever you want. We'll have to figure out your yard first. She laughed a real laugh, unguarded, the Carol laugh. Okay, she said. Okay, Grandpa Bob. When I hung up, I sat there a while longer. The light was changing over the ridge, going orange and then pink, and then the particular deep blue that comes just before dark. I thought about Carol. I thought about the chair inside by the window waiting. I thought about a Tuesday night in January when I almost didn't answer the phone, and then I did, and I said yes before I understood what I was agreeing to. I thought about James in my garage doorway watching me pack, asking me what I needed. I thought about Margaret setting 3 pieces of paper on a table at a birthday party and folding her hands and saying, "I understand you have some documents." I thought about Tyler with his arms crossed in a doorway, and Emma wrapping newspaper around objects like they might be important, and Ethan in his driveway looking like a man trying to memorize the moment from the inside of it. I thought about Lauren sitting across a kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and saying, "Can we talk, really talk, not planned?" I thought about 8 weeks of breakfast at 6 and mopped floors and dish towels folded in thirds and photographs in a drawer and a chair in a garage. 8 weeks of disappearing a little more each day inside a house where I was valued for my function and tolerated as a person. And I thought about the moment in the hallway when I heard Lauren's voice, and I set the groceries down, and I walked back out of the house, and I sat in my truck, and I called Margaret. That moment. The moment I stopped performing patience and started choosing myself. Here is what I know sitting on that porch in the pink light of an evening in Evergreen, Colorado, at 68 years old. Being old does not make you invisible. It only makes you invisible to people who have decided not to look. Being a parent does not mean accepting whatever your children or their spouses hand you and calling it love. Love is not a schedule. Love is not a function. Love does not come with a list of contributions and a reminder about the correct way to fold the laundry. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. I had lived alone for 5 years after Carol died, and I was lonely, yes, in the aching, specific way of a man whose house still had her shape in it. But I had never once felt invisible in my own life until I moved into someone else's house and let them hand me a job description on my second night. The difference matters. Lonely is a feeling. Invisible is something someone does to you. And the only person who can decide when you stop being invisible is you. I stayed on that porch until full dark. The mountains were shadows against a sky full of stars, and the cold was coming in off the ridge the way it does at elevation, clean and sharp. I should have gone inside. I didn't yet. I sat there a little longer with my empty coffee mug and Tyler's drawing in my shirt pocket and the absolute quiet, unshakable knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 3 months later, Ethan and Lauren came to Evergreen for a Sunday. They brought the kids and a grocery bag, and Lauren made lunch in my small kitchen without commenting on how I had arranged it, which was something. Tyler found the yard immediately and started an investigation of the far corner that lasted most of the afternoon. Emma sat with me on the porch and talked, because she was 8 now, and talking was something she had decided to do seriously and at length. After lunch, Ethan found me on the porch. He sat in the second chair. I had bought a second one specifically, a plain wooden one, nothing that carried anything except the intention of there being room for someone. "Counseling is going well," he said. "Lauren and I. The financial stuff is..." He paused. "Hard. But we're in it together this time, actually together. Good. We might have to sell the house." "I know." Lauren's okay with it, more than okay actually. She told me last week she was relieved, that she'd been so afraid of losing it that she couldn't see how much the house was costing us. He was quiet for a moment. "Funny how that works." "People hold on to the wrong thing sometimes," I said, "when they're scared." "Yeah." He looked at the ridge. "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "I'm always honest with you." "Did you ever think about not giving me the chance at the party, when Margaret laid everything out? Did you ever think about just ending the relationship?" I had been waiting for this question. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I had known it was coming since the birthday party. "No," I said, "never." He looked at me. "Not once," I said. "Not because I wasn't hurt, not because what happened wasn't serious, but because you are my son. And I decided a long time ago, when you were still young enough to carry on your shoulders, that I would not be a man who used love as a weapon, not even when someone used mine against me." His jaw tightened. He looked away. "You were afraid," I said, "and you let that fear make you passive when you should have been present. That cost both of us something. But Ethan, I have never in your entire life stopped being your father. I was not going to start at 68. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I want to be better for them than I was for you this year." "You will be," I said, "because you can see it now. The worst thing that can happen to a person is not making a mistake. It's making one and convincing yourself it isn't one. You're past that." Tyler came around the side of the house holding a large rock he had apparently found important. He held it up in my direction. "Grandpa Bob, this one's got sparkles in it." "That's quartz," I said. It means there's probably more of it nearby. His eyes went wide. He turned around and went back to his investigation. Ethan laughed. A real laugh relaxed all the way through. I hadn't heard that from him in a long time. He's going to dig up your entire yard, he said. Let him, I said. That's what yards are for. A month after that visit, I received a letter in the mail. No email, no text. An actual letter, handwritten in Lauren's precise script on plain white paper. She had not discussed it with Ethan first, she said so in the letter. This was hers alone. She wrote that she had been thinking for a long time about what I had said to her in the kitchen, that she could not build a real family on managed information. She said she had been managing information her whole adult life, and she had believed it was intelligence, and it was actually fear. She said counseling was teaching her the difference between organizing a household and controlling the people inside it. She said the children talked about me every week, that Tyler had started a rock collection, that Emma had asked if Grandpa Bob could come to her school to talk about airplanes, because she'd told her class about me, and now everyone wanted to hear about the engines. At the end she wrote, I know I don't get to call us family just because I want to. I know that's something built over time with consistent choices. But I want you to know that I'm making those choices now, one at a time. And I hope someday you'll be able to see that. I read that letter twice. I set it on the table next to the coffee mug with the Southwest Airlines logo. I sat in Carol's chair by the window and looked at the ridge for a long time. Then I wrote back, longhand like she had. 3 paragraphs. I told her that family is not a destination you arrive at. It's a direction you choose to keep moving in. I told her I was still moving in that direction. I told her to bring the kids in 2 weeks because Tyler had sent me a drawing of the quartz rock, and I had found more of it in the yard, and I intended to put it in a jar and give it to him. I sealed the envelope. I put a stamp on it. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the road and I put it in. And then I walked back to my porch and sat down in my chair. My chair, the one I chose in the place I chose in the life I had taken back with my own 2 hands. And I looked at the mountains and I drank my coffee. And I was for the first time in a long time entirely and uncomplainingly at home. Growing older does not mean becoming less. It means becoming more precisely yourself if you're brave enough to allow it. Being a parent does not require a lifetime of self-erasure. It requires presence, honesty, and the willingness to let the people you love see you clearly, not as a function, not as a resource, not as a solution to someone else's problem, but as a man who is still here, still full, still worth knowing. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a father can do for his children is not one more sacrifice. Sometimes it is simply this standing up, choosing himself, and showing them what it looks like when a man refuses to disappear. I did not walk away from my family. I walked back to myself, and that made all the difference.